name is Heige Boehm, and I'm the author of Secrets in the Shadows. And my novel is about two boys, Michael and Wolfie, who are growing up in Nazi Germany. And they are both filled with a sense of adventure. Both are delighted to join the Hitler Youth. And in 1943, Michael's father orders him to join the 12th the Waffen SS. And then Michael goes on to serve in the Hitler Youth 12th SS Panzer Division, and Wolfie joins as well. Both of the boys are met with a lot of horrors, and slowly their allegiance to Hitler starts to change. The part that I'm going to be reading today is Michael and Wolfie are 13 years old, and with their classmates, they're on a train to Berlin to visit and learn about their Berlin. And Michael spots a young girl on the train, and he just has to speak to her. And it turns out that, in fact, that she and her mother are runaway Jews. And this is the part where they're being discovered. At the next small village, the train stopped, and I stared out the window in horror as Rebecca and Frau Shapiro were dragged and kicked onto the train platform. The Sturmbannführer had Rebecca by the scruff of the neck now, and two soldiers held onto her Mutti. Wolfie and my other classmates pressed their faces to the windows to watch, and I rose to my feet, mouth open in silent protest. Then I saw Rebecca struggle free and start running away, but the Sturmbannführer pulled out his Luger and shot her. She stumbled and fell and tried to get up. He shot her again. After that, she didn't move. All this time, Rebecca's Mutti was screaming and struggling to get free, to run to her daughter. The Sturmbannführer nodded to the soldiers to let her go. Then he shot her dead, too. Okay, that's enough, shouted Herr Geezer. There's nothing more to see here. Sit down, everyone. I sat down, not saying a word, just staring at nothing. Ah, Michael, why did they shoot them? Wolfie asked. I shook my head. It was my fault. I pulled out the hanky that Rebecca had dropped. In the corner of it, embroidered in pink thread, were the initials R.S. It was my fault. My fault. I plunged my hand and the hanky back into my pocket. The train started up again, and the grinding and turning of the wheels, metal on metal, lulled me into a world of untold truths. My fault. My fault. My fault. The next part I'm going to read is where in 1944, and Michael and Wolfie are in the Ardennes, and they're on a mission. Michael is in charge of a small battalion, and the youngest person in that battalion is 14 years old. And this is them at night when they're lost. The boys huddled together. I sat as close as I could to them. And although I knew the cold still ripped through their hardened young hearts, sleep captured them. A small glow from the fire danced over my comrades' faces as they slept. My head still throbbed and my throat burned. Distant shooting and bombing rang out through the night. But somehow the artillery fire felt soothing, and why not? I had grown so accustomed to it that I was just numb. After a while, our small fire burnt out, but the thunderous cracking of the war god's whip continued to rip across the sky, lighting it up in explosions of blues, orange, and yellows. The earth trembled beneath me. Thank you. Secrets in the Shadows was inspired by my need to understand who my father was, because he was quite a complex man. And Dad was a man who was a product of the Nazi era with all his damaging influences, beliefs, and effects. He was born in Germany in 1933, the year Adolf Hitler rose to power, and he was 12 when the World War II ended. And like you said, my father was murdered in 1983, so I never really got to know him as an adult or his stories. And to understand him, I had to research Nazi Germany, and I realized that there were no easy answers to any of my questions that I had about my dad. And the best that I could do was to try to understand what it must have been like for him to grow up during the Nazi era. And that's why I wrote Secrets in the Shadows. I spent 10 years researching World War II. I collected my mother's and relatives' war stories. I read a lot of historical books, particularly The History of the Hitler Youth 12 SS Panzer Division, Volume 1 and 2, which was written by Hubert Meyer. I also interviewed a SS boy soldier, Edmund Krautwinkel, whose firsthand account of service at the age of 16 as a SS paratrooper and sniper were really quite invaluable. And I also had my novel vetted by two war historians, David Boris and Dr. Roman Töpel, who Roman Töpel had interviewed and recorded the stories of 80 SS soldiers, and 12 of them were boy soldiers. And because of Dr. Töpel, I was able to get my hands on some really amazing letters that were exchanged between SS soldiers and American soldiers. And they both, these letters, both of the men fought in the same battle, and as older men were able to share their accounts of that same battle. And I found that just quite incredible. I initially didn't set out to write for a YA audience. It was actually my publisher, Ronsdale, that had said, oh, this is a YA novel. But I'm really thankful for that, because a lot of adults also read YA, and now the novel is being used in some of the schools to teach aspects of World War II, which is really lovely. And I find that it's a really great way of teaching history without it being so dry when it is fictionalized. And I think children and really anybody, you tend to remember aspects of it because it was told in a story form. So yeah, I didn't set out, but I'm really glad that it turned out to be a YA and a crossover novel. I think it ties us together when we know each other's stories. I think it leaves us with more compassion for one another, which is, for me, I'm always thinking of where am I pushing the pendulum? And my goal is to push it towards a kinder world. And I think when we write these stories, we see the human side of other people and what they go through. And because of that, we tend to have more compassion when we know somebody's stories. I found it kind of disheartening because I saw so many similar patterns in unfolding, especially what was going on in the States with the elections. Um, and I did find it, I found it disheartening. I felt good writing my stories and understanding, and it made me feel more compassionate. And I just think it's so important to know our past and learn from it. And, there's a lot of emotional things that come up as well. So it gives a really good opportunity to do a lot of self-reflection as well, which can be challenging on its own.